Welcome back to the Chip Lunch Podcast. It is amazing to have everyone along with us who has been listening or downloading or watching us on YouTube. Thank you very much. And I'm here hosting the podcast on my own, as usual. Not as usual. The other guys are not available, but I do have someone available, and her name is Dee Monkton. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Now, hang on. Dee is short for?
Deirdre.
Deirdre. Okay, cool. Is there any reason you in particularly prefer to be called Dee rather than Deirdre? Is it just the syllables?
No, it's not. We moved to the States and lived there for 6 years. Yes. And while we were over there, no one in America had ever heard of the name Deirdre.
Really?
And none of them could remember how to say it or pronounce it. And they abbreviate everything to initials over there. TJ, etc., etc. I became Dee, and it kind of stuck when we came back.
Is your middle name an E? Or is it if they abbreviated, what would it be?
D-A. D-A, but no, I just became shortened to D.
You sound like an author, don't you? Like D.A. Monkton. My favourite story by D.A. Monkton. What was my other question? How did they mispronounce Deirdre?
Oh, I think that they just...
Deirdre.
Yeah, they just couldn't really remember it. I don't actually recall how they mispronounced it.
That's
but
okay.
they'd always go, "Oh, I'm sorry, what was that?"
Oh, good American accent, by the way. Right. Well, in the start of the Chip Lunch Podcast, we always like to ask the same question every time, which is, how do you like to eat your hot chips?
With plenty of chicken salt.
Oh, no. I know you were telling me that you haven't listened to... You've only listened to your husband John's episode of the Chip Lunch Podcast, which is totally fine.
Correct.
But there is a battle between myself and Ethan and Braden, the usual co-host of the Chip Lunch Podcast, about whether it's chicken salt or plain salt.
Definitely chicken.
I'm very much on plain salt. The other two are on chicken salt. So that's why, sorry. Okay, so lots of chicken salt?
Lots of chicken salt.
Like how much are we caked? Are we caked in chicken salt?
Well, you don't want it so salty that you can't eat it, but yeah, a decent amount.
Right, okay. And is there any sauces involved as well?
No
sauce.
Plain chicken salt.
No, like some people have said they have vinegar. You haven't had vinegar with it?
My daughter is partial to vinegar. Ooh. I don't mind it every so often, but if I was to just go and have chips by myself, chicken salt.
I don't know if I've ever had vinegar with hot chips. I've had like salt and vinegar potato chips.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same, except they get a little bit soggy. That's my biggest thing with adding the vinegar.
Yeah, I don't want soggy chips either.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And is there a particular place you like, or a particular memory that you have associated with a place that you got hot chips from?
No, not really.
They're all bad.
No, a typical weekend as the kids were growing up, we would have takeaway one night on the weekend. Nice. And just go up to our local at Janali and pick up some chicken and chips from there.
But even that's nice, isn't it? Like it's just you make memories as a family. It's like, remember we used to go and get hot chips? That's nice. Anyway, the next question on the Chip Lunch Podcast, we always ask at the start is, and it's what the podcast is about, is how did you become a Christian?
Yes, so that was a slow process for me. For those that were a week away, they might know some of this story because I gave the abbreviated version there.
I'm so sad I didn't get to hear it, but that's why we've got the podcast.
Yep, but that's okay. So I guess I always grew up with a sense that God was there. I am a child of the 70s, and being that era, most people used to send their kids to Sunday school then. I am one of four. My siblings and I were born within a period of 3.5 years, so there were four of us born very close together. Yeah. My parents chose to send us to Sunday school, I believe, not so much to give us any sort of religious education, but to give themselves some peace and quiet on a Sunday morning, actually. Okay. So we went along to Sunday school for a number of years when we were in primary school.
Where was that?
I'm sorry?
Where was that?
Primary school or the church?
Oh, the church,
that was at Lugano Uniting back in the day.
Okay.
Yeah. Born and bred in Lugano. Yes, and so grew up with a knowledge of God because of that. I had a fourth grade teacher who back in the day, things are very different now, but back in the day she was very clearly a Christian. She used to make us stand behind our chair at the beginning of every morning, and we would say the Lord's Prayer in school before we started the day.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so times have changed a
Yes,
lot.
that's right. Not really allowed now.
No.
Yep.
No, that's right. Anyway, I think over the years, Sunday school changed to maybe various kids' clubs after school. I joined GFS, which was at the local Anglican church when I was probably in about 6th grade.
What's that, sorry?
I'm sorry, yes, okay. So that stood for Girls Friendly Society back in the day.
Oh, did you have to learn how to be friendly? Is that
It was just a kids club where we would learn about Jesus.
Yeah.
My brothers used to call it Gorilla Face Society. which
very, very inventive?
Well, that's typical brothers for you, isn't it?
Yeah. And so what was GFS like, sorry?
It was good. We'd play games. We'd do a Bible story. You'd get some friendship there. You'd have leaders there, and much like kids clubs today, that sort of thing. Very much run by the Anglican Church. It was very big in the 70s and 80s. So I continued sort of growing in my knowledge of God all through that time. Then by about year 10, I guess, I have twin brothers 11 months younger than me. So there were 3 of us under 1 in our household.
Wow.
They started going along to the local youth group, and being so close in age, but me as the older sister, I didn't really want them doing anything that I wasn't doing, and so I started going along to the local youth group as well. And out of that, we were encouraged to go along to church. When I was at church one day, I remember listening to the minister there preach, and he was talking about how being a Christian is not is not about saying rote prayers like the Lord's Prayer. And
Yep.
by the way, I had continued over the years to say the Lord's Prayer every day myself since back in 4th grade. That was something that my teacher back then had instilled in me, and I continued to do it. But I guess it didn't really mean a lot. And yes, I listened to my minister preaching, and he was talking about how it's a personal journey with God, a personal relationship. He talked about Jesus and the relationship that you have with him, as well as what Jesus had done in terms of dying for your sin. And I began to think about that, and I started praying more personal prayers. One of the things in year 10, once again, that I was facing at the time was I went on work experience as a teacher, and I was working in a 3rd grade class along with the teacher there, and I used to walk home every day. It was just, once again, at Lugano Public School. I would walk home after the classes, and one of the kids in the class walked with me one day, and she was sharing how her mother was in hospital, and they were looking at doing tests for her because they thought that she had leukemia. And I was just devastated at hearing that. I put myself in that position and thought, oh, that would just be awful to know that your mother had a potential life-threatening disease. And I went home that night and I prayed for this woman that I had never met. And anyway, the next day the little girl came back and she said, guess what? My mum doesn't have leukemia.
Wow.
And I guess to me at the time that was a real case of God answering prayer and hearing the prayers of someone that he loved. And it was the beginning of a real faith journey for me, where I have constantly throughout my life seen God answer prayer. And he doesn't always answer it in the way that I want, but I know that he like, you can't manipulate God, but I know that he loves me and he listens to me. And he hears me, and that was the beginning of my faith journey. So
Wow.
I guess that was probably the beginning.
This is why I love doing this podcast, because the way that we hear people have their different experiences with God and becoming a Christian. Like, and you said that that's now a pattern over your life, is that God answering prayer, and that's really interesting. And so once this kind of happened, how old were you when this happened, with your friend walking home and talking about
I would have been about 14.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
So, and then what do you think changed for you after that moment? Because like around that time you've become a Christian, what do you think changed? What was different? Were you thinking differently? You felt like you were transformed?
To be honest, I was always a kind of a nerdy, goody kid anyway, so I don't know that outwardly I changed very much.
Okay.
I was always a rule follower, but I think it was the beginning of starting that relationship with God, delving into my Bible, reading that, understanding more. That's probably what changed.
Yeah, right. And do you think that grew as you got older in high school? Was there a chance for you to be more outward as a Christian? Because we've probably said a number of times on this podcast, and even I became a Christian when I don't even know if I was 15 or 16 now, but around that time. But I don't know if it was ever outwardly displayed in my actions, or even how I spoke to people or thought about them differently. School is a very difficult environment to do that sometimes. I'm just wondering if did you see opportunities for you to do that once you became a Christian?
I think at school the biggest opportunity would have been through a group called ISCF, Inter-School Christian Fellowship at the time. I don't even know if they have something similar, but I don't know if it's exactly the same. Sure.
It's a lot of acronyms.
Yes, it is. It was basically the Christians in the school would meet together. Yeah. If there was a Christian teacher there, he would lead us just in studying God's Word. And it was very uncool to go at lunchtime to the ISCF group. But I did have opportunity to do that, and it was kind of neat to identify the other kids that would go along there too, that you wouldn't necessarily pick that would be Christians, but there's no guarantee that they would pick that I was.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's similar to we had Aurelia on the podcast at the end of last year, and they actually, during the COVID lockdowns, they said no other meetings of any kind, and they brought us a lot back. And Aurelia actually, and a number of the other Christians in the school, lobbied for the Christian group to be back. I don't know if it was. I don't think it's called ICF anymore. But
okay,
it was a similar thing. And she said the same thing as that you said. It was like, oh, now I can see who all the Christians are in the school. Partly because now I don't feel like I'm alone.
Yeah.
But also like, oh, we're all Christians. We're all here. We're all hanging out. In that sense, it's really cool.
And I think when you're in high school too, certainly for me, it was difficult to, it still is difficult to talk to about my faith out to people that do not necessarily know Jesus. So I wouldn't necessarily stand out as a Jesus follower at school, other than the fact that I probably wasn't a rebel and
Are you a rule follower? As you
yes,
said?
That's right. So, but am I a rule follower because I follow Jesus, or am I a rule follower anyway? There wasn't a big sort of distinction there.
What made you a rule follower, do you think?
I think that's probably part of my personality.
Okay.
I don't know.
What is your personality then?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I tend to be fairly straight-lined and more on the quieter side.
Okay, that's all right. And was that what it was like growing up in your family too? Was it a very rule following family?
No, not necessarily. I was probably the quieter one. My brothers are a lot more adventurous and rowdy than I am. But, yeah.
I wonder if do you think that's why you were a little bit quieter, because they were a bit too gregarious? So you're like, I'm going to like stand out a little bit differently from them?
Maybe.
Not intentionally.
Yeah.
Like you maybe not even thinking that intentionally. It's just how you grew up.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're going to ICF, you said, you've become a Christian, which is awesome. What about church? Was that Lugano Anglican as well?
It was at Lugano Anglican. So I did, as I said, did start at church there when I was 14 and continued there right through until I was was married pretty much. Well, engaged. The year I got engaged, I moved churches.
Yep.
But, yeah.
What did church look like for you when you started going when you were 14? Was there a youth group on Friday night or?
There wasn't a youth group as such. There was, so when I first started going along, there was church on a Sunday evening, which was when the younger people used to meet. We were then encouraged at the time to start to go to church in the morning as well, to get to know different demographics of people, and it was actually very beneficial, I think. So typically for many years, church for me was church on a Sunday morning and church in the evening, and we would do a Bible study before church in the evening as well, the young people at the time.
Yeah, right. You said it was beneficial to meeting other people. Why was that?
I think that you can learn a lot from other generations. They did encourage a mixing of the generations at that church. There were the occasional families that would invite the younger people back to their place for lunch after morning service, and it was really neat to actually observe as a 14-year-old, I guess, how they were raising their kids and how their kids would ask questions about the sermon. Well, not even the sermon, I guess. It was Sunday school for them, but they'd discuss what they had learnt on Sunday morning, and I remember how the dad would talk to them about that around the Sunday lunch table. It was neat. Yeah.
And like even seeing the older saints, like that are a lot older than you, it was cool to see. Like, and actually being a Christian is a long-term thing. Yeah. Well, I like hearing that because, like, as you may have picked up at Soul Revival Church, we like to talk about intergenerational, and it's a really key focus of us of our church is that it's really. We do think there's a lot to learn from older generations, as you're saying, but also vice versa, the older generations learning from the young people. Have you? In that time, I mean, it might have been over a couple of years, or said you were at Lugano for quite a long time. Did you see the older people learning from the younger people as well? Is there any example, maybe that you can't pick out right now?
I can't think off the top of my head, but I think that the older people did enjoy interacting with us. There was, it wasn't a youth group that was led by a specific leader as such. My memory is very sketchy, if I have to be honest. I know that we had some sort of a gathering because that's how my brothers and I ended up there right at the beginning. But there was no official thing that happened every single week that I can recall. But anyway, all to say that occasionally the young people would get together and we'd put on things such as a dinner for the entire church, and we would serve them and prepare the dinner and make it a black tie sort of affair, yes. And I think that they really enjoyed that. And then some of the more outgoing members of our youth would put on some sort of a concert or a show as well, and they really enjoyed that.
That's lovely.
I don't know whether they learnt from us. I'm sure that they did, but it's hard for a 14-year-old to see that.
No, that's why I said you might not be able to remember. But how do you think that set you up as a Christian? Do you look back at that time and go, it was really formative for you? I mean, you're always, when you become a Christian, it's like really formative. Then you have other Christians around you to really help you in your faith and to understand things in the Bible and things like that. But do you look back on that time now and go, oh, that was just really formative, I'm really glad it happened? Not so much. It's okay if you say not so much too.
I think, I'm not sure. I think that certainly the years, it was a formative time, as there was a fair group of us that were all confirmed together. And that whole group, it was a formative time where we would get together and have confirmation classes, and we would discuss sermons afterwards and so forth. I can't really recall it being
that's okay
formative with the older
I'm
people
asking you to, like, without being unkind. I'm asking you to go back a while.
Oh, it's a long while ago, and my memory's shocking at the best of times. So yeah.
No, that's cool. What about after? Like we're coming out towards the end of school. Really, is what we're talking about. What was that like for you? What were you planning to maybe do after school, or if you were planning anything? And I mean, I'd love to. You also talked about God answering prayer as a pattern in your life. Is there anything around that time as well that God's answering prayer?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So my goal had been to be an occupational therapist.
Okay.
I was never a great student. I put the work in, but in my book, 51% was, just enough to pass, and that was it. I probably enjoyed myself a little bit too much in Year 12 and did not hit the books as much as my friends did. So my dream of being an occupational therapist went out the window when my HSC came up. But that being said, all through the Year 12, I had consistently been praying for guidance and for wisdom with what God would direct my path to. And I came back with a fairly shocking HSC mark that that did not allow me to do anything other than teaching or nursing. They were my two options. Having done teaching as a work experience, I knew that was not for me. So therefore nursing was the option.
Right, okay.
So in one sense, God had closed all the doors and opened another. And quite honestly, I can't imagine myself doing anything else now. I've never regretted doing nursing. So just seeing that, the way that he did that, albeit through my own laziness probably because I didn't study all that well, it was an interesting way to see that he directed my path to become a nurse.
And does that mean, do you have to go to college for that?
Yes.
Okay.
So I went to UTS for 3 years, studied nursing there.
Sorry, is it... Because it was teachers' college, right? The reason it's in nursing college, or is it just you go to university?
You go to university and you do a these days it's a degree, but back in the day it was a diploma of applied science.
Oh, right.
In nursing.
Right. And what's it like being a uni student for yourself? I mean, because sometimes Braden and I and Braden and myself and Ethan have been on here and we kind of sound like we're trashing university. We don't really mean to do that. We're not really. We just talked about our own experiences. But what was your experience like being at uni/college?
I had a great experience at uni. I really enjoyed it.
Great. That's good.
Yeah.
I didn't have any friends at uni, really.
Okay.
I had one friend, sorry.
I had some very good friends at uni. That being said, it was a real opportunity for me to stand out as a Christian because none of them were Christians. It was difficult. There was a Christian group at uni, but doing nursing, we were not on the regular campus. We were on the grounds of North Shore Hospital, and they had a specific nursing campus there. So we would go there, and that's not where the Christian group met. So I really didn't join up with the Christian group at all. And I had to sort of forge my own way there.
There's a few Christians in your actual course, though?
There were, but their timetables did not align with mine. So my group of friends, the people that were mostly in my tutorials and so forth, not one of them.
So if you're spending a lot of time at Royal North Shore, you said?
Yeah.
Does that means you're getting a lot of practical experience?
No.
Oh.
No, so it was built on the grounds of North Shore Hospital, but it was purely owned by the university. I think it's been torn down by now. It was just picture a normal lecture theatre and tutorial rooms, and then it had other rooms set up for prac and so forth.
The only reason I ask is because that's my bugbear about university is that there was very little, for my course, very little practicality. It was very textbook heavy and those kind of things where it didn't really translate into the real world. So I thought that would be cool if you were able to do that.
Well, we did. And it's the same these days too. You do blocks of prac where you're sent out to various hospitals and you actually have to work or in a nursing home or a rehab hospital or whichever area it is for that particular prac. And anything from a week to 4 weeks at a time. You will work alongside regular nurses and so forth.
Is a diploma different? How is a diploma different to a degree?
So I came in, I was the third lot through of university trained nurses. Back in the old days, they used to train them through the hospitals, and where you would have to live in the hospital, you'd be a student nurse and so forth. They decided that they wanted to increase the professionalism of nurses, and so they put it all through the university system. The only reason that there's no difference between a diploma and a degree other than the fact that they started it with a diploma. It was exactly the same course. The year after me, the people that graduated came out with a degree with no different work. But,
was that frustrating to you?
Well, we get paid the same in the end.
Oh, okay. Right.
No, it's still recognised, I guess, just because of experience and so forth.
And so you're a little bit older now, as we're talking about. So did you start serving differently in the church, or did you find opportunities for serving at the same time as when you're studying?
When I was studying was kind of hard because I was doing a lot of supplementing. I was working as well, so I'd be working on the weekends. Once I finished uni though, then that became an opportunity to attend Bible studies and so forth. Just trying to think back if I actually did. I guess I did serve when I think about it now, in terms of morning tea rosters and things like that. It wasn't a huge church, so it wasn't a lot in terms of leading youth groups or Sunday school or anything like that I could do. That opportunity probably came more once we moved to America.
Oh, really? Okay. But before we get to that though, so where did you end up meeting your husband, John? Because he's probably told the story, but unfortunately I forget it. So let's hear your side of the story.
Yeah, okay. So back in the 1980s, early 1990s, they had a thing called coffee shops, which for those that haven't heard of those before, it's not where you go down and sit and have a cup of coffee. It was the Christian version of going to see a Christian band back in the day. So there were a lot of Christian bands around in the 80s and early 90s, and I went with my group of young people from church. John was there with his group, his youth group, at I think it was the Rockdale Salvation Army at the time. We went there to see a Christian band, and I can't even tell you what the name of it was now. I don't think it was In the Silence. It might have been something like Priority Paid, but we went to see one of those bands.
I've heard of Priority Paid.
Yeah,
so.
okay.
We'll go with that.
We went to see one of those bands, and I was notorious for not liking to wear shoes back in the day, and I had taken my shoes off and put them in a pile with all of the girls from his youth group, because we were getting down and dancing and enjoying ourselves. And John saw me there, and at the end of the night struck up a conversation and asked me out.
Oh, wow.
So
that's very, very forward.
It was. When I look back now, it was very brave of both of us. It was forward of him, and it was brave of me, because I said yes. He took my number, and I didn't see him again for 2 weeks. And so, to be honest, the first time we went out, I couldn't actually remember what he looked like.
That's really funny. Some random guy.
Yeah. But I am convinced that was once again God working in our lives.
Oh, why do you say that?
Well, there's another story behind that. I guess going back a couple of years at school. No, it wasn't. It was just as I finished uni. I had gone away on a camp with some friends of mine, and at that camp we had been challenged, I guess, as to where God was in terms of priority of our life, and I had realised that I wasn't putting him as top priority in my life. I had been dating someone at the time, and I felt challenged that I was putting him, this fellow, above God. Right. And so at that point I came home and broke up with him. And I also made a commitment not to go out with anyone for at least 6 months. So during that time, I focused on God. Unfortunately, I kind of shot myself in the foot because anyone that asked me out after that, and I said no, they all kind of went, oh, she doesn't want to go out with me. And so there was, everyone stopped asking me out. And I went through a period of about 3 years with no one and not dating at all. And then suddenly John appears out of nowhere. He was someone I didn't know, and he asked me out. And that's how that
sounds like you had a lot of suitors, though. You said no one. Like I don't think anyone's asked me.
No, I wouldn't say a lot.
Just, will you go out with me? And it's like the guy's like, and you're like, no. And then the next guy's, will you go out with me? That's lovely, though. So by focusing on God, you think that He put John into your life at the right time?
I think
I was worried when you said you shot yourself in the foot, that's why you weren't wearing your shoes.
Oh, no.
And then I was worried you'd also say, like, John was the one that stepped on and broke my toe or something. But
no.
Because that was the thing, is you take your shoes off.
Yeah, back in the day. Well, I just never really liked wearing shoes. I still don't. So
Oh, don't you? Wow.
I'm just a little bit older and more wise now.
Had a few mishaps on the feet. Wow.
In fact, the day we got married, our minister actually did check. He made me sort of pull my dress up a little bit to see if I was wearing wedding shoes.
Are you wearing shoes?
Because he'd been so used to me turning up at church with
really?
not wearing shoes.
You just went to church barefoot as well?
Yeah.
Wow. What do you think that is? Why do you don't like wearing shoes?
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you have like really like rough feet, like real strong, like big calluses and stuff on your feet?
No, but it's been a number of years now.
You're like, no, I look after my feet. Well, that's cool. So where we're up to, so you meet John and you went out, you couldn't even remember what he looked like.
No.
That's great. I think that's really funny. No wonder other people didn't want to ask you out. They were worried. She can't remember what I look like. So then what happened from there? Like, how long were you going out? You said that when you got engaged with John, that you decided to move churches.
Yeah. So we were dating about 3 years, and towards the end of the third year, John finally graduated from his university course, which had been a long 6 years that he had been studying.
Because he did that, I remember he said he did that while he was working.
Yes, he did. It was a very big slog for him. He worked very hard. So we dated about 3 years, and then he asked me to marry him, and we were engaged for another year after that, and then we got married.
Shoes on.
Shoes on.
That's good. The other thing I didn't ask you, though, sorry, before we keep going, is what was it like going into nursing? Is it a hard thing? Because I personally could not be a nurse. I don't want to have to deal with people's problems, if that makes sense. What about you you thought you were really almost called to be a nurse?
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something about seeing people when they're at their most vulnerable. A lot of people, when they go into hospital, they either are facing an operation and they're scared witless, or they're in there because they're extremely ill
really
and feeling awful. And in both of those situations, you get to see people at their worst, at their most vulnerable, and it's really good to be able to help them, to make them feel better, to reassure them for those that are nervous about what they might be facing, or in the case of if they're not feeling well, there's nothing better that I liked more than walking into a room and seeing them in pain and vomiting and so forth, and being able to actually make a difference and offer them drugs and, just even help them freshen up a bit and make them feel better.
Oh, yeah. That's really lovely.
Yeah.
Where do you think you get that heart from that? Is it just from that God put it on your heart to care for people in that way, or is it just an experience in your life? You're like, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I really don't know. Maybe God has put it on my heart. It's just, I think it's an incredible privilege to see people, roots and all, bare bones.
And to love and care for them when they're in that position, rather than make them feel any worse.
Yeah.
You can actually improve their situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's true. I mean, when I've gone to hospital or, my children have been born, it's like, it really makes a difference when you have a midwife or a nurse or someone that's like, no, we'll help you. Like, or, because to be honest, there's some others that you've come across. They're like, I can tell that you don't want to be a nurse anymore. What about the night shift though? Is that tough?
Yeah, okay. So I haven't done night shifts for many years now. It is hard, and I've never been good at sleeping through the day.
Yeah.
So I really only did a few years of that. Once I had children, I never went back to full-time nursing. We've been very blessed that we haven't had to have me work full-time since the kids have been born. And I've chosen to remain casual, and that allows me to pick and choose my shifts, which means I don't need to do night shift.
I find it so hard to do night shifts, and also like the changing of it all the time, not just sticking with it. Is there a difference between working on the night shift and to the day shift? Like, what's the biggest difference? You get more wild people at night.
Yeah, they're as in the patients.
Oh, anything really. I'm just looking for differences.
Oh, there's a lot of differences. It's definitely quieter. Now, I have to preface that by I am a surgical nurse, so I look after. I don't work in the operating theatres. I look after people before their surgery and prep them for surgery, and when they come out from surgery. It is. Other people that work in the ER or midwives and so forth, it's crazy 24/7 there, but it definitely does get quieter usually on the night shift, the craziness from the day as people slowly start to go to sleep and so forth, it calms down. So that's the nice part about it. It can get extremely difficult to stay awake if it's quiet. Yeah. Sometimes it's better to be busy just because when you're on your feet, it's not so hard. Yeah.
Rather than snoozing off in a chair or something. I was talking to someone recently, I think she works in midwifery, and she was saying that like at the 3 o'clock in the morning, they'd like just run up and down the corridors kind of thing. Like maybe not running, but get moving around the corridors because you
have to just to wake up.
To stay awake. My sister's partner, he's a paramedic, and it's a similar thing of like he has to stay. He stays at the station a lot of the time during the night time, but even then, it's the same thing. So I've got to keep moving, otherwise I'll fall asleep, and then that's no good. So it's not something that I could do, but I appreciate that you did it and don't do it any longer. So let's go back, to you and John get married. Shoes on, as we said. And then how long until you moved to the US?
Let me think. It would be about 6 years. So in between then, our daughter was born. So Laura was born 4 years after we were married. Shortly before that, John had been offered a job in the US. He worked for Qantas and he was dealing with a lot of companies over there that outfit the interior of the Qantas aeroplanes.
Okay.
One of them had decided that it would be really good to have an engineer on board, so they offered him a job, and he came to me and said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "No way, I'm not going to that gun-toting country." Especially I was pregnant at the time with Laura, and I thought, I don't want to go to a place where I don't know anyone, trying to raise a new child and a baby by myself, well, with John, but trying to navigate all of that without the family and friend support systems. So I said no, which I shouldn't have done. I should have prayed about it probably, but you learn about that in hindsight. Anyway, time went on and Laura was born, and I actually discovered that having a baby is, while it's life-changing, it wasn't devastating. I was coping with it just fine. And we thought about it and we did pray about it, and the offer was still there. And we thought, well, this could be a really good opportunity, an adventure to go together as a family unit. We thought if we're going to do it, it would be good to do it before Laura goes to start school. And so we chose to say yes. Well, actually, I should start again. She was 5 months old, and we were starting to consider it. And we did. He had to do a work trip over there, so I accompanied him with Laura, and we all flew over there. just to check it out, see what it was like.
Yeah. Is it Seattle? Is that right?
It was north of Seattle, so halfway between Seattle and Vancouver, a small sort of town.
Okay, right. Was there a lot of rain there?
Yes, there wasn't as much as what there is in Seattle, but yes, it was very grey a lot of the time.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
And what was that experience like moving over there with a young daughter, 5 or 6 months old?
Well, when we first went over, we just went to check it out. So, and there's a story in itself because we went over there and John worked his week there, and then we thought we'd spend another week or two travelling around and just experiencing it. 2 days into that, I actually ended up in hospital and not knowing what was going on with a lot of abdominal pain. It turned out that I had a ectopic pregnancy. I hadn't realised I was pregnant at the time, and I had to have emergency surgery. And I said to the doctor over there, can we sort of make a run for it and come back to Australia? And she said, no, you could die on the way. And so with a 5-month-old, John was suddenly thrust into having to look after Laura, having to feed her and figure out how to do that while his wife was in surgery. I ended up having surgery and I was fine. And the love and support that we had one contact over there that we had made contact with through a friend of a friend of a friend, who was a lovely Christian lady. And she turned up and helped us with everything that we needed, make sure that I was okay once I got out of hospital and so forth. Just that very experience in itself made us realise that God will look after us wherever we are, and it helps affirm our decision to move over there, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, and thank you for being willing to share something that's so personal, first of all. It's really lovely to for you to be vulnerable like that. We talk about other people, so thank you for that. But so you said that you met someone that was a Christian there and that really helped you. Was you able to find like a church community pretty quickly after that?
When we actually moved over there, we didn't end up going to her church. We had been given a number of a list of evangelical churches in the area, and we decided that we would start working our way through those to find a church that worked for us and that we could contribute as well. We got to the second or third one and we gave it a good shot. We spent a month in each one just to get to know. It was a very lonely time for me when I first went over there. I was there, and by this stage, when we actually moved there, Laura had turned 1. I was 6 months pregnant with number 2 child, and it was winter when we got over there. We had no car. I was more or less constrained to an apartment with a 1-year-old and very heavily pregnant myself. And it was...
And coming off the back of a surgery as well.
Well, yeah, this is another 6 months down the track by then.
There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on. And I had a husband that was working 5 days a week. Yeah. And it was a very lonely time for me. Anyway, we tried the first couple of churches and they were very big churches and we kind of fell through the gaps, I guess. The third church that we went to, though, we walked through the doors and the minister was greeting us. Actually, no, it was as we left. We were on our way out and the minister was there shaking our hand and he wanted to hear our story. He was like, what are you doing over here? And we explained and said, we are looking for a new church. And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, that must be really lonely for you.
Wow.
He'd heard our story and he said, why don't you guys come back for lunch to our place? And we did. We went back and unbeknownst to him or us at the time, his wife had felt compelled to set another 2 places for their roast meal. So it was totally a God thing. Yeah. We went back there. We talked a little bit more about our situation and he said to me, you don't have to come to this church, but you obviously need feeding. Please join our women's Bible study group through the week. And even if you don't attend this church, you are always welcome just to fellowship with these ladies and
That's
to come.
lovely.
And the extension of that invitation to me just meant the world. So we did find that church community there. I found a wonderful bunch of women across the ages. They were young and old, and there was a big women's Bible study group there that split into smaller groups. There was a creche that they ran there, which allowed the young mums to be able to put their babies in the creche so that A, they had a rest from the children, and B, they were actually able to study the Word of God uninterrupted, which
and a bit
was
of conversation and stuff.
which was just amazing, and have proper adult conversations too. So yeah, it was a real blessing. And
so that's like a really, and I'm guessing that were you praying about that? Like you've
absolutely,
struggling for a while.
Because I had been struggling for a while, and John was aware of that too. And yeah, so we actually did end up attending there. I went along to the women's Bible study group. John took longer to get to know people there because obviously it was only on Sundays he was able to get there.
Yep.
But I was seeing these ladies through the week as well. But he could see that they were awesome, just offering us fellowship and so forth. And so we developed a really close friendship with a lot of lovely Christian people over there.
That's really awesome. What a blessing that would be. To, like when it's been real hard for you, like in that 6 months period or whatever. To then to have that was just so lovely. And I'm assuming that you referred earlier when we were talking that you were able to find a church community that you really felt really blessed by. Sorry, I'm kind of repeating myself here, but what do you think how that affected you in terms of your Christian faith? Because you'd moved to somewhere that you didn't know anyone. You have this operation, then you have young children and pregnant with another one, a young child and pregnant with another one, and then you come into this group of women who are really supportive. How does that mould you as a Christian?
I guess you can see that God just is constantly working in your life and constantly looking out for you. God, it's just reaffirmed to me how much God loves me. And regardless of the situation and regardless of what we face, God always wants the best for us. It doesn't mean that we won't have suffering or go through hard times, but He is always walking there with us. He will have people, provide people to comfort us when we need it, and He will bring us a peace as well.
That's really lovely. What about is it different being an Australian in America? Did you have to grow pretty accustomed? My dad lives in America now, and he keeps telling me every time I see him, he's like, I'm becoming more and more American.
Yes.
Because he says gas instead of petrol and stuff like that.
Yes, I spoke a whole different language over there, and not one of the reasons, but John used to joke that he would have to come back. We'd have to move back to Australia soon because his wife was turning American. Australians speak very quickly, and if you speak like we would be speaking over there, none of them can understand what you're saying. And so the easiest way to make yourself understood is to actually develop an American accent.
Oh, really?
And to speak their words, their language, if you like. It's funny because we're both, Western English-speaking civilizations, but the cultures are very, very different. Yeah. So one of the early instances when I went out with some of the ladies from church, they invited me out just for dessert one evening after we'd put our kids to bed and so forth. And so we all went out, and they all ordered something a la mode. I can't remember what it was, like a chocolate cake a la mode. And I was like, what does that mean? And they said, with ice cream. They said, what do you say when you want ice cream? And I'm like, with ice cream?
Yeah. Is that a French word, a la mode?
That's probably,
what it sounds like it is.
It is French, but ice cream in French is glacé.
Yeah.
So I don't really understand. the literal translation is in the fashion. So
yeah, that's what I was just looking at.
yeah.
It says the first description is according to the prevailing style of fashion. Second, served with ice cream.
Yeah. So I don't know. But there's a lot of different things that they say, and there's a lot of Australianisms that we have that they have no idea about either. Yeah. And they tend to look at you really funny and kind of say, yeah.
But like, speak English.
yeah, they really don't know.
Yeah, right. But what is it... what was my original question? I can't remember. But the other thing I keep thinking about is that... my question was about it being Australian, being an American. But do you think there's any differences in between Australian Christians and American Christians?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I don't want to get political.
No.
And I think things have probably changed over the last few years too, from when we were there. There's a difference in the culture over there in that Americans are extremely passionate people. By contrast, Australians as a bunch are fairly apathetic, and so Americans come across to Australians as very loud and in your face. They're not actually. They just have a real zest for life that we do not have, and I think that can translate into their faith as well sometimes. Right. So yeah, they
got an example without naming names or anything. Or what did you see in America that you're like, I haven't seen that in Australia before?
Oh, many things, but
a big one.
Big one. Oh well, when our church, to raise money for the youth group one night, we had a pie auction.
Oh, and auction.
An auction.
Wow.
And so literally the entire church would turn up, and we'd have all these round tables that you would sit at, and all the women in the church would bake pies and so forth. And we had an auctioneer there, and he would auction them, and each table would sort of pool their money. And they would auction off the pies, and then they'd bring the pie to their table and they'd get to eat it.
Really?
And it got quite funny because, you'd get the husbands at various tables competing if it was their wife's pie and if...
This pie's better.
Yeah, that's right. But they have this real passion and really just get into everything that they do.
Did you make a pie?
I have no pie making skills, but I did make a pavlova, which they had never seen, raised $110.
Wow, they're like, I've never seen this before. What is this delicacy?
I also made a sticky date pudding that didn't sell. But that's okay. I got asked for the recipe 3 times after that when it was sort of given away and someone ate it and went, this really...
Does that mean they don't have a sticky date pudding in America?
No, they do not.
Sticky date pudding's delicious.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that they don't have over there. So.
My dad complains that he can't get any real bread. That's what he gets upset with. He's like, I can't get decent bread.
It's very sugary bread. It's not...
That was his point. He's like, he comes home and has like a bit of sourdough. He's like, why can't we just have this in America?
Yeah.
Well, you moved over there, Dad. Anyway. My other question I wanted to ask you was about being a mum. Because you have 3 daughters, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Were they all born in America? No, the
Laura
first Laura wasn't.
Here, and then our younger 2, Bethany and Kayla, were both born in America.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, is it different being a mum in America as well compared to Australia? Because then my next question is, what has God taught you through motherhood? So you can put them together if you like. But
okay. Is it different being a mum? It's a little bit difficult for me to separate my life here and my life over there as a mum, because I think you go through seasons in your life, and that was the season when my children were all preschoolers. So I don't know how my life would have looked like here.
That's fair.
I don't know that I can answer that.
But what about the 2-part question was, what has God taught you about being a mum, do you think? Or let's say just as a parent. Because for me personally, I have reasonably 8, 6 and 2 are my children's ages. And I know they have definitely taught me a lot in those last 8 years. What about for you? How do you think having your daughters and being their mum has changed you? And especially what God's trying to teach you?
I've grown an appreciation for, I think, it's hard to voice this, but I think I've grown an appreciation for a little bit of what God feels for us and his love for us as his children, as a parent, and not specifically as a mum, but you would know this too. When you become a parent, the love that you have for your child is unconditional, and they can let you down and they can go off the rails and do things that their behaviour cannot be great sometimes, but you love them regardless. Yeah. And God's really taught me that that's what happens with doing. His love for us as well.
I really like that.
He loves us regardless of what we do, and I think it's really neat sometimes to look at at your relationship with your own children and see it from God's perspective with us. Yeah.
And then and it changes how you relate to God and understand his relationship with us in the same way, right?
That's right.
I was thinking just the other day, for some reason I always check on my 2 older kids. They sleep in a bunk bed, and every time I go to bed I just always check on them and just like fix up their doona if they so they don't get cold or something. But then you just go like, it's almost impossible to describe how like much you care about your son or your daughter. Can you imagine how much more it is for God?
That's exactly right. Like, you can't compare yourself with God, obviously, but it's just a snippet, just an inkling of how God feels about us and his love for us.
Yeah.
And I think that's really neat. That's a gift that he's given us.
Thank you for enlightening me on that. I think that's really helpful as a parent. So that's cool. You only spent 6 years in America.
Yes.
And you came back.
Yes.
What was the reason, and what was it like coming back into Australian society?
Okay. That was, there are a lot of reasons that we came back. I think John had a new boss at work that he was finding it more difficult to work with. We had ageing parents. And we also started to think, like, at the beginning we were kind of like, you know what, we're loving this. We could stay here forever. But we had been looking to get a green card while we were over there. The company John was working for had been applying since the year that we moved over there to get a green card, and it was not forthcoming, which was okay. But I guess we did a lot of praying about what the future looked like. We never really knew, and it is a little bit unsettling to not know where in the world that you are going to end up. So John's job. We had ageing parents. I guess our kids by this stage had started school as well, and we were beginning to think, well, are we going to be here for another 5 years, 10 years? If we're here for 10 years, are they going to start dating someone over here? Are they going to marry someone over here? Do we want to stay here forever, or do we? And so we kind of worked backwards and said, well, do we want to retire in Australia or in America? And the answer was yes, we want to be back in Australia. And we worked backwards from there, thinking, okay, well, we need to move back before the girls hit sort of university stage or start dating seriously. We just kind of worked back from there. We did a lot of praying about it, and John started to let it be known amongst the avionics circles that he was possibly interested in coming back. And there was a job that we were actually thinking of moving to Brisbane at that stage and looking for work. He was looking for work there, but there was a job back at Qantas that came up, and it looked like it was written for him, and that was definitely a God moment as well. And he applied for that, and he got it, and we ended smack back in the Shire again.
Well, that was I have a logistical question on that. So if you're moving back, it's not like you've gone on a holiday and you come back and you know where your home is. So what do you do when you come back? Are you staying with someone, or you just go and stay in a hotel until you find somewhere to live? Or
we actually had bought a home before we left in Kirrawee.
Right.
So we did have and we had been renting it out the whole time. So we did have a home to come back to.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, that certainly made the landing a lot easier.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Albeit we had outgrown it by then. So
I was going to say, yeah, did you all fit in there for a short amount of time?
We did for a short amount of time.
Yeah, okay. So I think, do you come back to nursing then? Is that what you did?
Not immediately. Our youngest was only 4 when I moved back, so probably a couple of years. When she started school, we then looked at me going back to nursing. But that was intimidating because it had been 10 years.
Right.
And I wasn't feeling all that confident. But I started working on night shift just a couple of days a week. It was what we could manage in terms of tag teaming with John. John would get the kids off to school in the morning. They would be at school. I'd be there to pick them up, and I'd go to work, and he'd be sleeping at home while the kids were asleep as well. So yeah, you do what you do when the kids are little.
Yeah, that's hard. That's hard work. And then so, if you're going back to nursing, and you just stayed casual the whole time now.
I did. I did.
But then did you move into doing, what did you say, sorry, operational?
Surgical nursing?
Surgical nursing, yeah, you said that.
Yeah.
Did you move on to that afterwards?
No. I've always been a surgical nurse, even back right from the get-go. Mm-hmm. That was the area that I ended up working in.
Are they planned surgeries or are they like emergency surgeries?
Most of them are planned.
Oh, okay.
Throughout the years, it's been different areas in different fields, but most of them are planned elective surgeries, but not always. You'd get people with appendicitis that had come in, needing their appendix out, people that have broken their arms, etc., etc. So, yeah. And
then, so I mean, you're also like not only coming back from a different country, but you're moving churches. Mm-hmm. What was the story about you? I think, if I remember correctly, you went to Sylvania Anglican for a while, and then how did you end up coming to Soul Revival Church as well? That's a long period, I'm guessing, but
yeah, we were at Sylvania probably for about 13 or 14 years, I think.
That is a long time.
I guess throughout that period, our kids had gotten old enough to have their own driver's licenses and so forth, and they'd moved to various different churches as well. And we felt that it would be good for a change. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We weren't necessarily having to stay put just for the consistency of the kids. And yeah.
Well, it's very nice to have you on here. There's also just one final question, which I teed you up before, and you said you weren't really sure, but I can see that there's like God's had a really big influence in your life. But looking back over your life, you're obviously a Christian now, but also you were a Christian when you were younger. What do you wish you knew? You know, something that you know now that you wish you knew when you were younger.
That God's got us in the palm of His hand. Yeah, it regardless of what you face, you can trust Him. He holds you in the palm of His hand, and it really, He will give you the strength to get through whatever you're facing, and He will walk beside you as well.
And I definitely agree with you. I should say that, but also I think something that I've really enjoyed having you on the podcast about is the encouragement it is to saying that like how much you've been praying. And how much there've been so many. There's that pattern that you said of answered prayer, and not always answered as we expected. I do wonder about that. Is I really think that God ever answers the prayer in exactly the way we want Him to. He was like, no. Even if it's like slightly the same as what you pray for, He's like, no. Just remember, I'm in control, kind of thing. And we're in the palm of His hand, not the other way around. And I think that's something that I've taken from doing this episode with you, is that we just can give everything to God, and He will answer it in His timing, in His will, and also what's best for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just need to trust Him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really neat when you can get to that point where you just do trust Him.
Yeah. Isn't it funny that how many times we're like, I just need to trust God, and then we don't, and then he reminds us again and again and again.
Yeah.
But it's probably time to wrap up the chips, as we like to say on the Chip Lunch podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And thank you for coming in and being willing to stretch yourself, as you said before we started recording, and having a go. Hopefully it's been a rather pleasant experience, not too bad. But yeah, thank you for your encouragement, and I think that's a really cool thing to keep thinking about, is that God holds us in the palm of his hand, and that we can always talk to him and he always listens. So
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Dee, we always like to finish with a one way, if you're happy to do a one way at the end of this.
Absolutely.
If you look into that camera, one way.